Since the last public board meeting in June, you certified a $33.3 billion consolidated budget for the current fiscal year 2025. Total spending increased by a fiscally responsible 3% from the previous year, and that budget provides for funding for all critical areas in Puerto Rico, including education, healthcare, public safety, social welfare, and economic development. It prioritizes initiatives that support strong financial management and economic growth. However, just as the Oversight Board worked with the Legislative Assembly on a budget that the governor could sign and you, the members of the Oversight Board, could certify as a compliant fiscal plan, legislators introduced a group of bills in the final days of the legislative session that would spend close to $1 billion more than what was agreed to in the budget proposed by the governor. No resources were identified to pay for that additional spending. The legislation would have increased spending by over 9% instead of the responsible 3% we worked on with the governor and legislative leaders up until that point. This spending would have put the budget out of balance almost immediately, and we would have to go back to the drawing board and figure out a new budget. It is clear that the days of spending beyond budgeted amounts and without identifying resources for long-term fiscal balance are not yet behind us. We worked with the legislature, and new language was added to the final budget resolution that will now require a certification of how any spending bills will be funded in the budget. The new language and acknowledgement is only a first step. Unfortunately, some legislation was passed before we agreed with legislative leadership on this language, and that legislation complicates balancing the budget. What is crystal clear is that the budget process in Puerto Rico must be reformed further. We outlined the details of these reforms and the path to a fiscally responsible budget process in the fiscal plan for Puerto Rico that you certified during our last public board meeting in June. Reforms to the budget process must happen in order to restore long-lasting fiscal responsibility. The legislative actions this past June make the case for budget reforms present and clear. We also analyzed the most recent audited financial statements for the Commonwealth, and after reviewing the audited financial statements for fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2022, we concur with the independent auditors that the report shows a $3.3 billion deficiency in the general fund on a modified accrual basis, the accounting standard under PROMESA. We continue to be concerned about the deficiencies in internal controls, which have been identified by the auditors and have not yet been addressed. On debt restructuring, the mediation for the PREPA plan of adjustment is ongoing. Following the June ruling by the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit on the extent of the bondholders' collateral and the recourse claim against PREPA, and the U.S. District Court extended the stay on all PREPA plan of adjustment related proceedings until October 8th of 2024. Puerto Rico's overall debt restructuring process did nevertheless take a very significant step forward. On July 25th, 2024, the Oversight Board asked the U.S. District Court of the District of Puerto Rico to close the proceedings under Title III of PROMESA to cut the COFINA debt. The restructuring of COFINA's $18 billion in legacy bonded debt is the Oversight Board's first Title III case. It became effective in February of 2019, and the COFINA plan saves approximately $17.5 billion in debt service payments. Almost 50% of COFINA's revenues that previously belonged to the creditors will now go to the Commonwealth's general fund budget. We expect the U.S. District Court to close the case soon and close that chapter of bankruptcy. On economic development, stabilizing Puerto Rico's finances, breaking decades of deficit spending, and reducing the crushing debt burden have been our signature achievements working with the government. You, the members of the Oversight Board, gave me a clear mandate. Let's focus on economic development now that the fiscal situation is stable. Budget process reform remains a critical gap in Puerto Rico's recovery process, but so is an economy that continued to grow reliably when federal stimulus money runs out. Our revitalization coordinator, Jose Perez Riera, has focused on our role here and how we can contribute to not only Puerto Rico's fiscal recovery, but long-term economic recovery. There is no shortage of economic development plans for Puerto Rico. We have reviewed 150 plans, studies, and reports. We met with stakeholders, economists, members of the business community, investors, about what is needed to get Puerto Rico to sustainable economic growth over the long term. Some necessary initiatives are already described in the fiscal plan. Many initiatives come from the government. Investments in infrastructure, reforms to make it easier to create and grow businesses here, increased labor participation. These structural reforms are the foundation for economic growth, but we have to go further. Today, Jose Perez Riera will provide the board with an overview of the Oversight Board's next steps. Reliable energy is as much a key to the Commonwealth's economic success as it is to the quality of life in Puerto Rico. It is a condition precedent to everything else the government and the board must accomplish. That is why energy reform was one of the first reforms that the Oversight Board backed. Working with the government, we broke up failing PREPA that resulted in an energy system whose policies were governed by political and special interest influence and a dramatic lack of investment. Today, Puerto Rico retains ownership of this valuable asset, but day-to-day management was transferred to private operators. The Puerto Rico Energy Bureau was strengthened into a truly independent regulator, now overseeing the power system. We created a plan to implement the will of Puerto Rico's elected leaders to move aggressively toward renewable energy. Those are the right building blocks. And after decades of mismanagement and underinvesting, we cannot go back to the old system. We cannot go back to PREPA. But one of those building blocks has come under attack recently: the Energy Bureau's independence. Only a politically independent regulator is an effective regulator. Act 10, however, constitutes a clear act of political and special interest interference with the Energy Bureau's authority, which is why the Oversight Board commenced litigation. Special interest groups just recently boasted in a court filing that they lobbied for months to persuade the government to employ political influence to interfere with the purpose and job of Puerto Rico's independent regulator. While Act 10 is directed at net metering, the Oversight Board's concern is not net metering. Renewable energy is a key element of Puerto Rico's energy transformation, and net metering is a very important tool for making solar more accessible and more affordable. The Oversight Board supports net metering. Contrary to what some of those who profit from a weak regulator would like the public to believe, invalidating Act 10 would not change the current net metering program. The critical building blocks are in place to continue the transformation. We could not achieve any progress at all without the structural changes, particularly breaking up the dysfunctional PREPA. However, we are far from done. Electricity is not yet reliable, and we must have an honest conversation based on facts. We experience too many power failures, and while some are necessary scheduled power outages to allow for a maintenance of a system that was in disrepair, far too many outages are related to a grid that lacks sufficient capacity and has been badly maintained for decades. The energy grid continues to fail the people and businesses of Puerto Rico. The improvements in the grid infrastructure and reliability are not where the people of Puerto Rico expect them to be this many years after Maria. This is partially because the investments to improve the fragile infrastructure have not happened. After Maria, the grid was restored to operational capacity just to get the lights turned on. However, in addition to the FEMA funds that got Puerto Rico back on its feet after the hurricane, Congress authorized over $17 billion in funding so that we can stabilize the energy system and improve its reliability. To date, not enough of those resources have been deployed, and as a result, we are operating with much of the same grid we had before we even started the transformation. Substantially, this is the same grid that failed the people during Hurricane Maria. The federal government, through FEMA, is providing $17 billion to improve the grid. However, only approximately $1.2 billion of this federal money has been spent 7 years after Maria. We need to move faster to improve and renew this grid. This is not a question of oversight. This is not a question of planning. This is a question of doing. There is oversight, and we have the money. It is also not a question of whose fault it is. It is a question of managing and getting things done. I am often asked, how was it done in New York? How did we build an entirely $3.6 million long Mario Cuomo bridge faster than anyone thought possible? How was a brand new LaGuardia airport constructed, not just a terminal, an entirely new airport, on the same site as the old airport without ever closing the airport, even for 1 day or 1 hour? Federal funds came in, state funds came in, federal and local permits were required, as were environmental approvals. The answer is government and contractors, planners and builders. Nobody did it alone. We all worked together with one single purpose. These projects advanced to completion because of effective operations management, prioritization, support from a bureaucracy, and an unwillingness to accept no for an answer. Improvements can happen faster. I'm not an engineer. I have seen projects language, and I have seen large-scale projects happen faster than anyone thought possible. And the difference is nonstop, focused attention, prioritization, motivation, and incentives. The current situation and pace is not acceptable and should not be normalized. I do believe with effective leadership, operations management, prioritizations, and support from the bureaucracy, improvements can happen faster. These are not easy tasks. It is difficult, and it requires confronting obstacle after obstacle, day after day, with creative and non-traditional solutions. Pointing fingers and attributing blame accomplishes nothing in this instance and may, in fact, set us back. I believe in accountability, and there are easily a dozen government agencies that play a role in the deployment of funds. That is why the Oversight Board brought all the energy players together, our team and the government, LUMA and Genera, Core 3, P3 Authority, the Energy Bureau, FEMA, and the U.S. Department of Energy. Governor, you sent the Secretary of State, which is how important the issue is, and we appreciate it. The challenge is that we have billions of dollars made available by the federal government specifically for Puerto Rico's energy grid, and Puerto Rico has not been able to inject those dollars into the grid as of yet, and the pace required for what is at stake. Every day that these funds are not deployed is another day that the people of Puerto Rico are at risk of being without power. We have lost too much time, and this is not a legal contract exercise, nor is it an accounting exercise. Lack of execution is an operational challenge, and that challenge is ultimately the responsibility of us and the government. Yes, there are legal and accounting concerns, but at the end of the day, the grid must physically be improved. The focus has been on obstacles, not how we overcome them. What I heard in the intense meetings was about problems, not solutions. Projects designed but not funded. Work was paid for but not reimbursed. Contracts were hired but not working because approvals are missing. These are not trivial issues. Getting reimbursed from FEMA is a process. Getting permits takes time. Nonetheless, management of the projects, the execution of the day-to-day deployment of the resources is the responsibility of the government. I know this because I have seen it and I have lived it firsthand. But let's not focus on the roadblocks. Let's focus on how to remove them. We need to prioritize the projects that we can get done right now, and federal agencies need to expedite approvals and waivers. Members of the board, our staff, and I will take much more active role in the process of helping to remove roadblocks. We have no desire to micromanage the process, but we also have a responsibility to do whatever we can to facilitate the effective deployment of these resources now to improve the grid. Federal funds are available for this initial stage. Judge Gonzalez, Andrew Biggs, you were here when the Oversight Board tried to take a very active role years ago. A previous government blocked the idea of appointing the Oversight Board's Revitalization Coordinator as PREPA's Chief Transformation Officer back in 2018. Instead, we focused on implementing PREPA's fiscal plan and created a system that can and will improve. But nobody took on the task of actively managing the system. We are now asked to be more involved privately and publicly by members of Congress who have specifically asked us to assist with permitting and support federal and local agencies. What we need to do is double down on the operational side and simply get what needs to get done faster with more boots and trucks on the ground. Focusing on contracts is a distraction from what we need to get done. I have not heard any convincing reason why we cannot do this. I believe we will get there. Recently, as a result of our meetings with Core 3, who has been working very hard to overcome obstacles, they've committed to pre-review approximately $240 million in Hurricane Fiona expenses, which should help significantly accelerate reimbursement timelines. And more than a dozen other requests for reimbursement that were delayed because of additional clarifications that were needed or because there was missing documentation are now closer to moving forward. This includes helping the parties resolve a $21 million issue and dispute for work that was already completed to repair streetlights and certain other work orders. We anticipate these efforts and their impact on the energy restoration process will continue to expand. Resolving delays in the system means that other projects that depend on FEMA funding can move forward now because liquidity is available to advance payments for these projects. However, this is not enough. We must keep pulling every lever we have at our disposal to speed up the pace to improve reliability. We are in the process of developing a new fiscal plan for PREPA, which will provide additional insight into the fiscal picture of PREPA, both on the revenue side and the level of investment needed to maintain the grid in the state of good repair. I am convinced that we will see change. Electricity will become more reliable and cleaner. We will pick up the pace. The people of Puerto Rico depend on it, and we have no other choice. Thank you, Chairman.